Hi, Chris Murray here, 3ds Max Technical Specialist for Autodesk Media and Entertainment. Thanks for stopping by the webinar. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into 3ds Max 2015's new features. Features like Select and Place, some of the Scene Explorer stuff, some new things in state sets, as well as a deep dive into the extension release features, Open Subdiv and the Crease Set modifier. So thanks for stopping by, sit back, relax, and let's take a look at 3ds Max 2015. I'm going to go ahead and start off with a couple of things in 3ds Max for layout. Now, we are definitely going to be covering some 2015 things in here, but I also like to include every once in a while something that has been in the program for a while that a lot of people don't realize is there, and just kind of remind people all the different things that Max can do. I know a lot of people are, maybe still on an older version of 3ds Max, or maybe they might be on 3ds Max 2015 or 2011. So even though we have features that are new in 2015, we also have features in 2012, for example, or 2013 that are possibly new to some people. So when I can, I'm going to point those out, but we're definitely going to be taking a look at some of the 2015 stuff. So I want to thank our friends at Blue Side Entertainment for this piece of content first. This is from their game Kingdom Under Fire. It's a great looking piece of content. We're going to be using it to talk about layout. Now, whether you're doing layout for games or previs for film or actual film production, Max has a lot of layout tools that you can use to your advantage. So we're going to be taking a look at them. One of them has been around for a while, and two of them are fairly new, and one of the three that we're going to look at is totally new in 3ds Max 2015. So we're going to be taking a look at that. So again, we're just kind of looking at our scene here, and we're going to be placing a lot of different tools. Now I'm going to pop out to my perspective view, and let's go ahead and just arc rotate around. I have a couple things already in the scene. You can see I have some layout starting to happen on this little plateau. We have a castle in here. We have another building right here that's kind of askew to the scene. And we have some other shapes and things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with one of the more specific types of layout tools, and that's called the spacing tool. Now, before I do that, though, I want to configure my asset browser. A lot of people don't realize that Max has an asset browser, and it works just like a web browser. So I can open it up, and it has a URL address, and you can even, as long as you're connected to the internet, you can even get out and use it as a web browser. But I like to use it as an asset browser in here because I'm going to be using some of our layout tools. Now, what I have going on here is if I open up preferences, I'm doing a couple of things with the asset browser that facilitate this workflow. First of all, in preferences, I'm using always merge or import the file, as opposed to asking me each time. This one is actually the default. So as I drag files in from the asset browser, it's either going to ask me each time, or we want to always merge. So we always want to merge the file so we don't constantly have to deal with that dialog box. The other thing I like to do is set my thumbnail size to large, just because I have a lot of Max files in here and I want to be able to see the thumbnails for that. So I'll set the thumbnails to large. And also we're going to use our filter here. We're only going to filter 3ds Max files. I could filter any of these other assets, but I only want to do Max files. So now that I have that set up, I'm just going to set it off to the side here, and we can go ahead and begin to use it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the spacing tool to put a wall around our mountaintop village here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search through all these different 3ds Max files that I have here, and I actually have one ready to go. It's called wall segment. So I click on it, and then I just drag it into the scene. And we want to use the scene material, and it just gives me a chance to drop it anywhere in the scene here. And if I arc rotate around it, I can see that it's definitely a game asset. We have a lot of detail on one side, but not a lot of detail on the other where we don't need it, which is fine. So we're going to go ahead and use this asset to populate around this village very quickly. So in order to invoke and I'm going to go ahead and minimize this because I don't need it for right now. So let's go ahead and place it around the scene using the spacing tool. Now, I could go up to tools and, go find it for example, in here. Spacing tool is, buried 2 menus deep. Or I could use a feature that was new in 2014, which is the context-sensitive search. So just by hitting the X key, I get this dialog box that shows up, and I could just type spacing tool, or just the first couple words of the word spacing, and it shows up. So a lot of people may not have used this yet, or may have forgotten that it was there. It was a new feature recently. I use it quite a bit. It prevents me from having to drill down in menus or remember where things are at. I know what the tool is, but I actually want to go just type in the name of the tool. It works for modifiers. It works for virtually any command in 3ds Max is there. You can do it. You just hit the X key. So we'll go ahead and invoke the spacing tool, and there it is. So the way this tool works is it requires a two-dimensional path within the scene that I've already created, and this is the red line that you see around the base of our fortress here. So I'll go ahead and I have the object selected that I want to put on the path. I'll just go ahead and say pick path, and then I just click the mouse around it, and it immediately puts it on the path. And you notice it says 3 copies. Let me zoom out a little bit and turn on the line again. All right, there we are, and pick the path. All right, so there it is right there. So I can dial in any number of copies of this object around the path, but you'll notice that all of the objects are aligned or oriented in the same direction, and this isn't really what we want. I don't want to have to go in and automatically reset the orientation of all of these objects. So one of the cool things that you can do is you can just say follow, and it will automatically follow the contour of the path. And I'll go ahead and turn this back on. It'll automatically follow the contour of the path, and it'll just automatically position all of the objects on the path. Now obviously you'll notice that some of them are interpenetrating, and so we can dial in the specific amount that we want. Since it is a game asset, if we want to get a little bit more like see over right here we have some gaps in there, we might want to have another specific model for that. The point is that we can get these quickly into position and then edit them later if we want to. A lot of people may not realize that there are also a lot of presets of how you want to offset the objects on the path. You can set the spacing, for example, from the N unbounded, or set a specified number, or divide evenly with an end offset, or start the offset, however you want to space it. You can also set spacing, for example, in between. You can have a specific count, and you can go a space between each object, or you can actually set the start and end offsets directly. So it's a really quick and easy way to get a lot of objects in your scene quickly with a fairly decent amount of precision. So I'll go ahead and say apply to that, and we'll go ahead and move on to our next layout tool. And that is the object paint tool. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this here because I don't need it, and we'll go ahead and select the tree. So object paint is one of the tools that was new to Graphite in a previous version. I think it came out in 2012. And I'll go ahead, and if you take a look at the Graphite modeling tools, we have model, freeform, selection, and here's object paint right here. I'm going to go ahead and open up the object paint ribbon. And we have some settings we have to pick here, but this is kind of the fun part of the process. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can get a look at this sparse or mountainside. Not a lot of trees on there. We actually want to take this tree and paint it into the scene. It's really easy to do. So first thing I'm going to do, though, is I have the tree selected. And before we just click on paint and start moving, I need to adjust a couple of settings that I know I'm going to have to deal with first. And this is probably the most important setting to think about before you start. You want to do a little test on your object before you actually draw this down, because spacing determines really how far apart the objects are laid down when you paint into the scene. So I've done some testing on this, and I know that my spacing is about 1500 because I'm working with a fairly large space here. I'm working with a mountainside. If I'm working with really small objects like maybe coins or bolts or rivets or something that's really small, you probably want a much lower number, but since I'm working in a wide open area, I want this a little bit more. Now the reason that's important is because if you have a really low number and you're working in a really wide area, you start painting, literally thousands of objects within a couple of seconds. So you don't want to inadvertently bog down the system on that. So it is a live paintbrush, which I'll explain in a minute, and you can change it after you've laid it down. But I'm just going to go ahead and start with 1500 here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on object paint. and I can start painting, and you can see that I immediately start painting objects within the scene. Now let me zoom in here a little bit so you can get a close look at this. So we've got that there, which is fine. And remember I talked about the spacing tool, so or the spacing settings. So I can adjust this if I crank this down. You know, let's go ahead and put in a number like 1,000. You can see that it gets a lot more dense. Actually, I think 100. So it gets a lot more dense. So you want to make sure that you have done some homework a little bit and you understand what's going on with the spacing there. And it is a live brush, meaning I have not committed these objects to the scene, so you can still make these types of changes after the fact. See, I can continue to paint more and adjust the spacing if that's what I want. But anyways, so you can see here we have the trees on the side of the mountain, not very appealing. They're just kind of sticking out there. It doesn't really look that great. What do we need to do? Well, let's go ahead and change the alignment of this. By default, align to normal is on. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that, and the trees immediately point Z up. You can see we can set the Z axis here if we want to. So I'm just going to leave them Z up. The other thing that I want to do is I also want to adjust their scale. Now I can set up a random count in here, and you'll notice that the default settings here are 20 and 200%. I can, you know, make this pretty small. I can take this, you know, maybe down to 10% and maybe take this up to 300%, and we get a large disparity, or, you know, a big delta between the types of trees that are created. You notice I get some pretty small sapling size trees, and I get some old growth style trees. So since it is a live paintbrush, I can go ahead and come in here and I can just start painting things right in the scene. I can paint on any part of the geometry, even if they're separate objects. I don't actually need to delineate which object is being painted on, although I can do that. So I'm just setting up some trees in here just to maybe hide some object intersections, or, you know, just some general scene entourage. So quick and easy way to do that. And then once you have your settings in here, you can just go ahead and commit these to the scene. So I'll just say commit those, and so now those objects have now been painted in the scene, and they are objects within the scene. Let's go ahead and take a look at another approach to object paint that I really like. It's kind of fun. So you can see here I have a bunch of objects that are already selected, or excuse me, laid out. I haven't selected them yet, but they're laid out in a very like regular pattern, and, you know, it's kind of very uniform. I want something a little more organic. Maybe the director is, maybe this is a previs shot, or, you know, you're really in the early stages of layout and you're kind of in experimentation mode, and the director says, no, let's try something a little more organic, or, you know, a little more loose to the layout of the village here. So I'm just going to grab a bunch of objects. All these houses here, I have all those houses selected. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use object paint to populate them within the scene in a more random way. So using the same tools here, so we're going to go ahead and, you know, paint on the surface, right? So we're just painting right into the scene. That's fine. I'm going to leave my spacing as it is. We'll just see what happens with that. The other thing that I want to set, though, is I want to turn on all randomly. So I want to use all of the selected objects in a random order to paint within the scene. I'm also going to set my scaling back to even, because I want them all to be the same size house there, because that would look a little odd. And the last setting I'm going to choose is I'm going to allow it to paint on painted objects. And this is interesting because as I paint down a house in the scene, I want to be able to paint on top of that. And it will it'll just be dropped down right on top of it. And actually, there is one other last thing that makes this technique work, and that's I'm going to leave unchecked align to normal. If I turn on align to normal and I throw down a house that has a slanted roof, the next house that I paint down could be on that, and it would be slanted, and we don't want that. So I leave everything like that, and I'll go ahead and I'll just start throwing down houses, and I can come in here and just start making a bit of a village. Get in there, get those bounding boxes out of the way, and so you can see I'm just like painting a bunch of objects around, and we could probably do an offset here. So you can see if we want to adjust our offset, our scatter offset, you can see we can scatter them this way. We can, you know, adjust the rotation, that sort of thing. Here's the offset value, so I can crank them up and actually bring them up above the ground plane a little bit. There, we'll soak it in there. That's good. And so, now we're getting these cool little interesting spaces, like, little alleyways and, little courtyards or things like that. And it's a much more dynamic and interesting look using this for layout. And if we go around and let's take a look at the silhouette of this object, of these painted objects, you can see it's a much more interesting set design in there. To have these objects painted in the scene, and you might need to go in and add a couple of placer objects, but you're very quickly getting an example of what we can do with object paint in that regard. So that's object paint, and that's the second method we're going to look at. And if you're on, say, 3ds Max 2010, this would be a feature that you would gain access to if you were to upgrade. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our third and final layout tool called the Select and Place tool. So Select and Place is one of the new features in 3ds Max 2015, and it has really changed the way I work with a lot of different types of objects. So before we get started on this, I'm just going to go ahead and grab a bunch of these houses here that I've painted. Let's get out of paint mode. And we'll just go ahead and delete this guy and select a bunch of these houses here just to get rid of them a little bit. We don't actually need them all in there. Alright, so now that we have those deleted, let's just go ahead and pop over to this object here. So Select and Place. So Select and Place has changed the way I work on a lot of different things. And so let's go ahead and take a look and see how the tool is used and all the different types of things that we can do with it. So up here in the transform tools, it's a new transform tool. It's called Select and Place. It's right there next to Move, Rotate, and Scale. You notice I have an object in the scene here that it's totally askew to the scene. There's really nothing, it's not aligned to the scene properly. In fact, all of this, except for maybe a couple of things, there's a lot of different angles and shapes and organic things going on, and this is where Select and Place really comes into its own on that. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Select and Place, turn it on, and I have some objects that are hidden down on the side of the hill here, and you're like, what? Hidden down here? What's going on? So I'm going to drag these up, and you'll notice that as I move these objects around in the scene, they're automatically aligned to the normals, and it's as simple as that. I just drag and move these objects around, and they're automatically aligned. In fact, if I go ahead and bring up the placement settings, you can see the advanced settings are really simple. There's not a whole lot here to do. We just turn on, for example, use base as pivot, and now it moves that object up to the base of the bounding box instead of the pivot point. And I can drag these objects up and just bring them up in the scene. I can use them really for anything. I can use them to kind of mash together different types of objects, which we're going to do a little bit more of that in a minute. I can do it with object placement. So for example, we can I'll put a tower here, or maybe it's a smaller tower. We'll put a smaller tower there, and we'll move this guy. This is a big guy, so we'll move this tower over here, and we'll hold down the shift key and just drag this guy over here. So now you can see that very quickly you can populate scenes in a organic way, but with a bit of specificity in terms of where the objects are on top of other objects. So I could actually do a couple of these. I can hold down the shift key here and drag these anywhere in the scene, and you'll notice that each object has its own individual placement for wherever it is on the scene. So if it's on any object, each object has is respectful of its own position on there. So you can grab objects of different types of shapes, completely different objects, and drag them around, and they will all place on the scene wherever they are individually. So that's that's a really nice way to work there. Now we also have auto parent and pillow mode. The interesting thing about this is if we're building, say, we're using this object to let's go ahead and grab this guy, and then we'll do a Control D to deselect everything, and I've got this guy back. And let's say we're building, we're building more towers onto this thing. So let's say I put this right there, but I want it to be part of that castle structure. What I can do is I can turn on auto parent mode, and I can drag this and put it up there, and as soon as I release it, it automatically becomes the child node to the object that was being used as its placement object. So it's a great way to quickly work. You don't have to do a lot of traipsing around. to select and link or to the Scene Explorer, you can actually just drag it up there and use auto parent mode, and it will automatically parent it to that. I'm going to go ahead and close this for a minute, and let's go back to this house. So you can see we have this house here, and there's really not a whole lot on it. If we look at the other houses, you can see they have doors and windows and a lot of other extra stuff. This house has none of it. And this is another great use of Select and Place tool. So I'm going to bring back our asset browser, and we're going to use this asset browser in conjunction with the Select and Place tool as like a kit bashing tool, where I can have all these different parts, and we're going to drag them into the scene and put them on there. So you can see I have, all these different house parts, but if we scroll down here and take a look at some other things, let's see, I have other scene accoutrements here. Here we go. So we have some windows and doorways and things like that, and a dormer. And so, we can actually start adding things in here using Select and Place tool in a really quick fashion. So up here I have, let's see, we'll go ahead and get this door object. We'll do the door broken. So I'm going to click and drag this into the scene, and I want to use the scene material, and there it is placed within the scene. And now you'll see it does not even align at all with the house that's in there. How are we going to place it in there? Well, again, we're going to use Select and Place. Now, one of the nice things about Select and Place is once you have the object selected, we just drag it over on top of wherever it is that we're going to put it. So I have a couple different places I can put it. I'm actually going to put it there, but you can see that it's, let me zoom in here a little bit. You can see that it's not aligned properly to the doorway, which is fine. I'll just go ahead and right click, and we already have base to pivot on. We'll go ahead and turn on rotate. And what this allows us to do is this allows us to rotate based on where it is in the position of that object. Turn off rotate and just drag it in there and reposition it. All right, and then so that's great. And if we need to do another adjustment, turn on rotate here. It'll rotate this way, or if we want to rotate an X, it'll rotate this way. So we have our object up axis, if you will, and this allows us to properly place things within the scene. So we can go ahead and maybe place in a couple of other things. Let's see if we can go get a window over here. So I'll drag this into the scene. I'll use the scene material, and I can just place them there. We're going to turn off some of our settings here for the moment. We'll use base as pivot, and we'll change auto parent, or turn that off for right now. And let's go ahead and drag them around. Okay, now you can see these obviously not oriented properly, and I could rotate them, but let's just try a different axis. We could do, any one of these things. I think negative Y is the one we actually want. Okay, yeah, there we go. So it places it right there. And notice I'm in a perspective view. I'm not even in a front or side view. So I'll go ahead and move this around there and hold down my shift key. And we can just, make a bunch of copies of this right into the scene here, and get it right where we want it to. Now, so very quickly you can see that we can add lots of detail to base scenes. We can reuse assets. It's a very efficient use of our time to do this. One other thing that is interesting about this, I'll go ahead and turn off base to pivot. Make sure I am at frame 0, because we can do things besides individual objects. So for example, I can do assemblies. Maybe you have a lighting rig that you always use, or maybe you have a particular setup that you need in every scene. In this case, I'm using a max file. It's called torch.max, and in it is a particle system and gravities and lights and cameras and a bunch of animation. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this into the scene, and we'll give it a chance to regenerate itself here. Okay, so there it is. I'll just leave it right there. I'm going to go back to Z-axis is up and get our place tool, and let's see what happens here. So I can place it right in the scene. Let's try a different couple of settings here for our up axis node. There it is right there. Okay, now what I'm looking for is I'm looking to see how it's actually placed directly on the wall there. And so plus Y will do it for us in this case. And I'll go ahead and turn on rotate, and I'll rotate the position up like this. And again, maybe just do another repositioning and come over here. I can see that it's not quite askew there. Or it's not quite straight up and down there, but that's fine. All right, so there you go. So we have an object that has particle systems. We have an object that has cameras and lights. In fact, if I switch to my camera view and I go to torch view, you can see I'm now added a camera to the scene with our particle systems in here. I have space warps, all different kinds of things that are part of a max file. Anything that's in the max file can be brought in and placed in the scene. And as long as you know what your pivot is, that you're the centroid that you're going to use for the base object, it's really, really easy to add this type of stuff. So again, that's the spacing tool that is new in 3ds Max 2015. Definitely, definitely worth upgrading if you're thinking about it, and really fast and easy tool to use. So for scene management, I'm going to open up another Max file that I have ready to go here. And we're going to be looking at definitely some new things that are in 3ds Max 2015 for this. First of all, I want to thank our friends at Post-Panic in the Netherlands for this. This is a little clip from MTV. Let me go ahead and load up that clip so we can see what it is exactly that we're looking at. So here's the clip from MTV. And this is the shot that they did in 3ds Max. This is MTV Europe. So we have this crazy looking jetpack, and here's the actual shot that we have here. So we're going to be talking about some scene management as it relates to how this shot is set up. So I'll go ahead and minimize that again, thanks to Post-Panic in the Netherlands for that. So here's our shot, and you can see there's our our cameras are in here, and just looking at a couple of other aspects. It's a quick shot. So the first thing that we want to take a look at in terms of scene management is something we're going to be looking at two things that are new in 2015 in this. The first one is the new Scene Explorer. So the Layer Manager has been replaced with a new Scene Explorer, and when you invoke the Layer Manager, you get the new Scene Explorer, and it's essentially the same thing as coming over here and saying new Scene Explorer, but these two tool experiences have been unified, and it's a much faster way to work than the old Layer Manager. It's definitely a step up in efficiency. The first thing that we want to take a look at is the fact that we can look at both the hierarchy mode and layer mode within the same dialog box. So whether you prefer to work in hierarchy mode, which is a listing of all the objects in the scene and what they do, or if you're used to working in layers, it works the way 3ds Max works the way you think in this regard. So whichever one you want to work in, you can work in, and you're not limited to working in just one either, which I'll explain in a minute. The other nice thing about Scene Explorer is it's now dockable, so I can dock it over to the side, and I can resize my window. Again, it's a dynamic experience. It's really easy to use. So I'm going to go ahead and pop over to, I'm going to actually bring this back out for a second. I'm going to undock it and open it up a little bit so that we can take a look at some of the other things that are in here. So I'm going to go over to the hierarchy mode, and very quickly, just a couple of simple, probably the most simple things that you'll notice about this is it's got a hierarchy tree, and it gives you a lot of information. You know, the light bulb tells you whether the objects are hidden or not, and we can very simply do lots of drag and drop linking, for example. So I can go ahead and grab this guy, and I'm not paying attention to what I'm linking him to, but I'll just go ahead and drag and drop them there. I can grab multiple objects if I want, and I can do drag and drop hierarchies directly within there, and just organize my scene that way. I no longer have to go up here and do select and link and wonder whether or not I've selected on the correct object. So drag and drop hierarchy. Another way to set things for hierarchies are if I right click on them and I say add selected to, and I can choose new parent. Now a lot of people may not realize what that means. It says new parent pick, and what that means is pick the new parent. If it doesn't have a parent right now, you can go ahead and select it, and if I just choose this, I can select any object in the scene, any object in the hierarchy, or in the scene itself, and it will allow me to adjust those. It will link to those objects as well. Additionally, I can create a layer from these selected objects, even if I don't have a layer, if I'm not in layer mode at the moment. I can say create new layer out of these objects, and when I go back to my layer mode, you can see that a new layer has been created with those two objects in there. So it's very quick and easy to use, and I don't have to actually go back and forth between the modes to take advantage of either one of them. So I can also create groups and containers directly from within here as well. So really easy to do. I can just create a new layer with nothing on it if I want. I can expand all, or whatever, or we can do isolate selections. Any of the other, some of the viewport commands are all within its own quad menu. So that's kind of a nice thing to do. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce this size a little bit. Oh, wait, before we redock it and talk about a couple of other things, I actually want to talk about some of the presets that come with it. So I mentioned that you can view it in hierarchy mode or you can view it in layer mode. It comes with a series of defaults that are task-based configurations for the Scene Explorer. The Scene Explorer is completely configurable. So whether you're maybe doing mass effects or maybe you're doing lighting, so example, I'll go ahead and choose the Lighting Explorer. And what this does is this shows me all of the column settings that may be relevant to this workflow. So shadows are shadows on and off. I can actually, click on it and take a look at those things here. So here the shadows are on or off. I can turn, I can change settings directly within here. Intensity, color, is it visible or not? Those types of things, really easy to do. In fact, that the Scene Explorer is really so customizable that this is a huge. Let's go ahead and I'll invoke configure columns. These are all of the different column settings that you can have. So if you don't see a preset that does exactly what you need, you can build your own preset, and it's saved with the max file. So it's always available to you as well. So you can, there it is right there. You can save Active Explorer to a default, and it will save over that. So it's with you whenever you need it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Property Explorer. So you can see that when you're choosing the preset defaults, it will actually adjust the camera, or excuse me, it'll adjust the column settings to be whatever it is that you need. So I'll go ahead and reduce that size a little bit, and I'll go ahead and dock it. This is the nice thing I was talking about earlier. I'm going to bring up a new Scene Explorer, and this Scene Explorer is the Property Scene Explorer in hierarchy mode. I'll go ahead and change this Scene Explorer to be layer mode, and I'll go ahead and dock it as well. So maybe you're your character rigger and you want to see control nodes versus geometry within the scenes, or control nodes versus effects or warps or anything like that. You can use any of your filters. So for example, I could have only bones show and layers, and work that way. It's really nice. Additionally, I can drag and drop between the two Scene Explorers. So for example, I can drag this object and put it on that layer, and it's a really easy way to work that way. So Scene Explorer is very versatile and changed the way that I work. It may seem like a bit of a housekeeping update, but honestly, it's a major new feature that really will make your work, daily tasks, a lot easier and a lot faster because you're more organized. The next major improvement in scene management in 3ds Max 2015 is the changes we've made to rendering and specifically state sets. So I have state sets here. Now, if you're not familiar with what state sets is, again, if you're maybe around 2010 or 2011, in 2013, I believe, is when, for the extension release, I think is when we had the first state sets in there, and then for 2014 and 2015, they've been in there since then. State sets is a workflow tool that allows you to do a couple of different things. Big things, actually. It's a render pass manager at the very least. What it allows you to do is it allows you to have states of your 3ds Max scene, record your 3ds Max scene in various states. So for example, if you have certain lights on or off, if you have certain textures on or off the same model, so for example, you can have an ambient occlusion texture in one state and your regular texture mapped textures on in another state. You can have objects visible and not visible in various states. And what this does is this automates the process of rendering out various versions of your 3ds Max scene. And when it comes to rendering out a lot of versions, it's like, well, where am I going with these? Well, where am I going with these rendered files? Well, you might be going to a compositing package like After Effects, or Composite, which is available for free on Autodesk Exchange. You might be, going to any other node-based compositing package, maybe an editing package, those sorts of things. So you want to have a lot of control over, how you're saving these things out. And the new things that are in 2015 are things that we have added to automate that process. So as you can see, I have a lot of different states here, but we're only going to take a look at 4 of them for the purposes of saving some time. So the new feature in 3ds Max 2015 that's part of state sets is, let me go ahead and move these up a little bit, and that's the addition of tokens. Let me go this way instead. There we go. So you can see our render output file pattern has some additions to it. It has things with greater than, less than symbols around it, and these are the new states. And if we click on tokens here, you can see, let me go ahead and move this up a little bit so it's fully on screen. You can see that we have a number of tokens. For example, state name, username, render size, month, day, year, camera, animation range. This is a really fast way to work when you want to have multiple iterations of each state. So for example, if I want to have certain states on or off, or I want to record certain things, I can go in here and I can, the file name that when this is rendered is going to be, it's going to render into the render output directory. It's going to render into the state name, which is going to be this string right here. And then the file name is going to contain the name of the state as well. And that's fine, but we may also want to add some different identifiers to the state name so that we know when it was rendered. So for example, maybe we render, what day it was rendered on. And we can insert characters in between there, and it will go ahead and it'll say state name on this date, and so we can do comparative renderings. And the cool thing about this is that it'll automatically generate directories underneath the render output, in this case the render output folder, but you could have any path in here, any production path that you choose. So your various versions of rendered files are not getting commingled, and you want to separate out the different render outputs. So it's really kind of a nice thing to do there. So I'll go ahead and reduce or delete that because we don't need it. So again, tokens in state sets. Now before we talk about the other things that are new in state sets, and since we are talking about tokens, I just want to divert a little bit and open up our render dialog box. And while we're talking about that, new in 2015 as well, if I go to my render file output dialog box and make it a little bit bigger so we can see it here, we've added naming templates as well. So token system is also part of the standard render output file. So if you're coming in here and doing a lot of versions or whatever, you can do the scene. All right, so it'll say the scene name. Now notice that I'm using a sequential file name here. So if you have this set as the template, it's very quick and easy way to delineate which scene your files come from. You can also set up custom templates and things like that. So again, new in 2015 is the naming templates for render output. But anyways, let's go ahead and get back into state sets and take a look at the last couple things here. So I have our state sets open. We have 4 states active. I'm going to go ahead and open up the compositor view, and we'll give this a second to populate itself with footage. Okay, so there we go. So we have a couple of new things that are in here. You'll notice we have 3 levels of nodes in our slate style of compositing editor here. So we have the shot footage that's coming in through here, and it's created into a comp. And what will happen is if we'll go ahead and use our compositor link and send these over to, say, After Effects, After Effects will automatically generate a comp with this footage underneath it. All right, and that's actually not new. That's what we expect. But what's new here is that what happens when each one of these render passes has its own render pass. And what I mean by that is this, is if we open up the dialog box, of course we're using state sets to do its own render passes, but you also may recall that render elements can be put on each render pass. And so you can have render elements of each render pass, almost like a subset of each set of footage. How do you manage that? And before, it came over all on the same level, and once it went over to After Effects, you'd have to move all of those extra rendered elements into different comps if that's the way you wanted to work. But now, in 2015, I'll go ahead and choose Compositor RE, which stands for Rendered Elements. What it does is it's going through the footage and looking for any footage that has its own rendered elements. And when it refreshes here, we'll see something a little bit different. Okay, so it's refreshed. We can see we have a much bigger tree, but we also have, you'll notice that we have 4 different layers of composite nodes as opposed to 3 from the previous mode of just compositor view. So we were in compositor view, and now we're in compositor view RE. And what this does is, this is really interesting. It takes all of the render elements per pass and creates a pre-comp, what amounts to a pre-comp in After Effects. So I have my full comp, and then I have all my render elements as pre-comps in After Effects, and it sets it all up. I can pre-flight everything that I need for After Effects here in 3ds Max. In fact, not only that, it applies the proper transfer modes, the typical transfer modes that you might want to use for this. So additive modes or multiply, depending on what it is that you're working with. So if I come over here, I'll go ahead and open up some of these other ones. Additive mode, normal, and addition. So all of these are set to be what you would probably want them to be in After Effects. So really nice way to work there. Another new thing, probably not as documented, but the fact that state sets also will record on and off of modifiers. So you can have various states with objects with various modifiers on them, and either have them on or off based on render state. So a couple of new things in state sets. Between the new things in state sets and the new Scene Explorer, scene management in 3ds Max is really taking a big leap forward in 2015, and definitely worth checking out if you're not part of the 2015 family yet. So let's go ahead and take a look at the other big news for our 3ds Max release, 3ds Max 2015 release, and that is the 3ds Max 2015 Extension Release 1. So let me just bring up our other Max file here, and we'll jump right into talking about what's new in Extension Release 1. So 3ds Max Extension Release 1 initially is for subscription customers only. So if you're a subscription customer for 3ds Max, you can actually access these tools today. They were announced at SIGGRAPH 2014 in August, and they were also released that same time. It wasn't an announce and release later. It was announced and released. And so we're happy to say that we've added three big improvements in the extension release that definitely make subscription worthwhile, and that is open subdiv with technologies from Pixar and Microsoft using those libraries, as well as alembic support, moving files to and from 3ds Max using alembic, the alembic file format. And finally, some improvements to shader effects. We've added several new shader nodes, as well as a node-based browsing system, much like we have in Slate. So those experiences are unifying as well. So I want to go ahead and take a look at Open Subdiv in two different aspects, one for hard surface modeling and one for more organic or character modeling. So I have this car that I've been working on. It's kind of a huge scale race car, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click, and I'm just going to isolate the selection. So we're looking at the car body, and I'll go ahead and go into wireframe view right away. And you can see that it's kind of messy, really. I have a lot of extra geometry here. The reason I have a lot of this geometry here is that I want curvature in specific places. So you can see I have extra geometry around the windows here, and I have lots of extra geometry on the fenders and places where I want curvature. And the intention was, well, maybe we'll use Turbo Smooth to do this. So we'll go ahead and wait for Autoback to finish. I'm going to go ahead and go up to Preferences, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off Autoback. All right, great. So the idea being that I would use Turbo Smooth on it. Well, if I use Turbo Smooth and I go over here and I add Turbo Smooth, it indeed, smooths over the model, but you can see that I lose a lot of area where I want geometric detail, like around the windows. Those square windows become rounded over, and my light wells look funny, and my intakes are all ovally and squishy, and really not what I want. So, I want hard edges in some places, like here on the lights and in the intakes and around the windows, but I want nice curvature in other places. So that's where Open Subdiv comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the turbo smooth there. And before we jump into adding the open subdiv modifier, let me go ahead and go into edge subobject mode. I just want to show you a couple of things that I have in here. I have the intakes that are selected. I don't know if we'll get a chance to look at those. I have the light wells, which are where the big light rigs go for the front of this massive vehicle. And I have the windows, and those, probably the light wells and the windows, are the things we're going to take a look at the most in this webinar. So let's go ahead and get out of subobject mode, and let's just pop on the open subdiv modifier. And you can see right away I kind of get the same results that I had with Turbo Smooth. My windows are rounded over. Everything looks a little squishy. My intakes are like this. I thought open subdiv was allowed to, was going to help us with that. Well, it does. And here's how it actually works. Besides the open subdiv modifier, you'll notice there's another modifier called crease set. Crease set modifier. So I'm going to go ahead and add the crease set modifier. And what this does is this separates the subdivision of the geometry from the edge control aspect of open subdivs and gives us a lot greater control. So I'm going to expand this out a little bit so that we can see what's going on. So in crease set, we want to use crease set to define edges where we want extra hardness or where we want to maintain the edge fidelity, places like the intakes or the light wells or the windows. So there's a couple different ways to define edges that you want to preserve their crispness to. So the first one is to go ahead and I'm just going to ahead and select a bunch of edges, and you can do it the automatic way. So we have select by face angle, and so any edge angle that is 90 degrees plus or minus a certain threshold will get selected. So if I go ahead and say select there, you can see I've got these edges here, I've got some things over there, and not really what I want. Let's go ahead and increase the threshold to 20 degrees, and now we get a lot more edges selected. I get my light wells in there, but I get a lot of extra things that I don't want, like maybe the engine intakes or this edge back here and some of the other things around there. So that's one way to select it. I'm going to leave these selected for right now and just show you how we actually turn them into a crease that we can work with. So I've got these edges selected, 416 edges selected. Then we'll go ahead and we'll say, we'll do auto edges. And these are the ones that were selected there. And I'm just going to set create a crease set. So I now have this crease set that has been created. I can deselect the model. I don't have anything else selected right now. But these remain in place. So for example, if I go over here and look at the back fender where we have these flares going on, and this might be an area where we want to actually keep our edge definition, I can go in here and I can grab these and I can control the crispness of those edges while everything else gets smoothed. So that may be one way to work. It's a nice fast way to get some edges in there, and you can select some things. Another way to work is to actually take advantage of the subobject selections that we had underneath the model here. So what I can do, I'll leave this here, and I'm going to open up my advanced options, and I'm going to say select all, or excuse me, I'm going to say auto generate. Auto generate crease sets based on whatever I have selected below. So I'm going to set my tolerance down to 0. I'm going to keep the existing set. I don't want to replace these because I might want to use these later. And I'm just going to say auto generate. And it says this will result in 4 crease sets. Do you want to continue? Yes, of course I do. And so we have a bunch of things in here. I have some vertices selected, which I'll explain in a minute. But there are our light wells. Okay, so I'm going to go back in here and let's take a close look at that. So if I come in here and I adjust the strength of the crease set, you can see that we go from mushy to fairly well defined. Now, if I weren't using crease sets and I were going to use the Turbo Smooth modifier, I would have to have a lot of extra geometry here and up there to maintain the curvature or the crispness of this edge. With Open Subdiv, I don't need that. So I can just adjust the setting to be whatever it is that I want it to be. In this case, we want to keep it fairly cranked up, and it's really easy. It's really easy to do. I have any number of other ways I can adjust this, but we're just working with edges right here. Excuse me, any other way I can select edges, but for right now we're just going to leave that one as is. Let's jump over and take a look at the windows. So my windows are all mushy. Now you can see that this corner is all nice and tight. Why is that? Well, that's because I have all this extra geometry running into there.
If I'm gonna use open subdiv long term, I may want to take those out because I don't need any of that. I can just use open subdiv, and let me show you what I mean by that. So I have some vertices here. If I go ahead and crank these up, you can see that that window has the corner vertices selected, and when I increase the value of that, those vertices are pulled back to their original position, and I get the nice square window that I want. Well, I have these up here. How do I fix that? Well, I can just go into vertex mode, and I can just select the vertices that are that I need to have the crease strength applied to, and I can right-click on the vertex, right-click on the crease set, and I can say Add Selection to Set. And what this does is this, after the fact, allows me to add any number of objects, or in this case vertices, to this crease set. So I'll go ahead and I'll select this guy, and I'll get that one right there. I don't think I have anything else in there. I think I'm good there. We'll just right click and say Add Selection to Set, and again it pulls it all into place. So you can quickly and easily modify your crease sets. It's not, you know, a fire and forget type of operation. You can modify them after the fact and tweak them all you want. Now the reason that we don't want to use edges here is because these are borders, right? So it's a nice little tip. If you have an open hole in the geometry and you want to maintain that border, you're probably going to want to use vertices because there's no surface in there to adjust, to subdivide and control with open subdiv. So you want to use vertices for open borders. So let's take a look at how we would use open subdiv with character work. So we've taken a look at how it works with hard surface modeling. Let's jump over to character work. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this racer. Actually, I'm going to bring it back, and I'm going to end the isolate. And we're going to bring back a piece of content by our friends at Keyframe Digital called Peggy's Little Harbor. I want to thank those guys for providing us this piece of content, and this is a show that they're working on. So I'm going to back out a little bit to our lighthouse. There's our lighthouse, and we have a couple of animated characters in here. I'm going to zoom in. So here's their little animated dog, and we're going to take a look at open subdiv workflows for character work for that. So I have some dogs hidden, and I'm going to want to go over there. We'll zoom in and we'll isolate this selection so that we can take a look. So what we're seeing here is the difference between modeling for Turbo Smooth and modeling for Open Subdiv. The model on the left, you'll notice, has a lot more topology to it. And if I zoom in here a little bit, we can take a look. You can see there's a lot of extra edges that are in here that are required to allow us to have smooth surfaces on broad areas of the geometry, but more defined edges or defined or tight curves in more specific areas like the face. So if we look at the face and the snout, you can see there's a lot of geometry here in the object on the left, but not so much with the object on the right, which is going to be intended for open subdiv. And if we look around at the model in general, you can see a lot less geometry needed for that. So if I go over here and I select our object, the one with open subdiv, you can see I've turned off the modifiers there, and you can see it's a little clunky looking, and you know, it looks like it has a lot less geometry. But once we turn on open subdiv with our crease sets, and I'll go ahead and select the crease set modifier, you can see using the same method that we did with the car, we selected a bunch of automatic edges, and we can crank those down, and it looks as though Turbo Smooth was applied. I'll go ahead and turn this down as well. So now that's as if just regular old Turbo Smooth was applied, and we're losing a lot of edge definition in the head. I can bring that back, and you can see we get edge definition in the head. And if I bring the rest of the hard edges back using the this hard edges was created with auto generate, you can see we get a lot of the definition in the snout back, and in the nose and in the paws. So again, we don't have to use as much geometry for open subdiv. So the last thing that we're going to look at for open subdiv is what it brings to performance. So I've got our dogs here. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to bring back our harbor. Actually, I don't want to unhide that. I'm going to rehide and bring that and end our isolation. Okay, So I have the dogs that we were looking at, but I also have our animated dog. There's that, and there we go. All right. So here's our animated dog right here, and I'm going to go ahead and isolate him as well. And if I scrub through, you can see, okay, we've got some work going on. Now this is the turbo smooth version of the dog. I haven't adjusted any of the geometry for this. And if I just go ahead and press play, you can see we've got turbo smooth on here. Got him better positioned a little bit. Let's try that again. There we go. Let's zoom out just a little bit. All right. We'll go ahead and press play. And all right, that's good. We can see him mostly well. All right. We're getting about 26 frames per second. Now I don't have any turbo smooth modifier on here at all. So I'll go ahead and turn on turbo smooth. And we've got 2 iterations going. We're still getting, it's dropping down a little bit. 3 iterations, starting to slow down. 4 iterations, not that we would ever really have 4 iterations on a character this, with a topology this simple, down to 5, and 5 iterations, it's absolutely chugging. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. And I'm going to zoom, or set our iterations back to 0. Now, let's just add open subdiv. I'm going to turn off turbo smooth. I'm not even going to use any crease sets. I'm just going to add turbo smooth in here. Same thing, iterations of 1. I'll set it back to frame 0, and we'll go ahead and press play. And right off the bat, it's not as good performance as turbo smooth. And we're like, wait, what? I thought this was supposed to be a better workflow. In fact, if I go ahead and I crank it up to 2, we're really chunking. If I go ahead and crank it up to 3, forget about it. It's virtually unusable. And remember, with turbo smooth, we were really chunking down as well. But this is where open subdiv gets a little interesting, is we have operating mode, GPU display. And if I go ahead and turn on that, we'll go ahead and give that a chance to recache. Notice our frame rate with 3 iterations jumps up to 30 frames per second. So we are offloading all of the mesh data transformations to the GPU. And so, in fact, if I crank it up to 4 iterations, which was bringing turbo smooth to a halt, we're still at mid 20 frames per second with our same thing, with our morpher, our skin, everything on there. So even if you don't use crease sets at all, if all you're doing is character work and you have a bunch of legacy data and you want to improve your screen performance and you have a really good graphics card, just use open subdiv instead of turbo smooth and turn on GPU display, and you're going to get a truckload of performance back. So again, one of the major improvements there with 3ds Max 2015 and the extension release 1 for subscription customers. So now that we have all of this set up with open subdiv and all of our skin and morpher on there, we can actually, if we wanted to, export this. So we would, export selected, and we can now export out to the alembic format and move it over to Maya or over to Mudbox. Or actually move it over to Maya or we can move it over to Maya or any other application that leverages the alembic file format. So again, that's pretty much it for what it is that we're going to be taking a look at today. I wanted to thank everybody for sticking with us and checking out some of the new things in 3ds Max 2015. I want to thank our customers that provided content for us, Keyframe Digital and Post Panic and Blue Side Entertainment, everybody that provided some great looking content. We couldn't do it without you customers, so appreciate it. Again, my name is Chris Murray. You can follow me on Twitter at Chris M. Murray, and I offer 3ds Max insights and stuff over there. But anyways, I want to thank you all for stopping by, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Thanks.